Okay, comrades, friends, it's a pleasure for me to chair this session on global issues with a superb panel that will reflect on the questions that we got from the working groups. As you know, we've had 12 different working groups in this area. There have been one on the Arab Spring, one on the progressive approach to migration and development, one on global governance, reshaping international organizations for global challenges, one on EU enlargement, one on water, one on the food crisis, one on the fiscal paradises, tax havens, one on Africa and security and sovereignty in Africa, one on how to make trade work for small producers and workers, one on how to unite the EU to combat the climate crisis, one on the European Union policy on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and finally, one on responses to multiple crises, decent work and its essential elements, employment and workers' rights. So this is sort of everything you wanted to know about the world in 1 hour. We have 6 people to help us answer these questions. I would like to ask for apology in advance if there are still issues to be solved on the global scene after this panel is over, but we will do our very best. My name is Espen Barth Eide. I am a member of the presidency of the PES, and when I'm not that, I am Minister of Defense in Norway. With me, we have the Khalil Asaouya from the FDTL in Tunisia leadership. Thank you for being with us. We have the leader of the CHP of Turkey, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. We have the Secretary General of the ITUC, Sharon Burrow. We have actually, you mixed places. We have Mr. Eamon Gilmore, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade and Labour Party of Ireland. We're also very pleased to have with us our comrade and friend and Director General of the World Trade Organization, Mr. Pascal Lamy. And also from Northern Europe, Nicolai Wammen, Minister of European Affairs of the Social Democratic Party in Denmark, and a recently appointed minister in a new government. And congratulations to you and welcome to the club. Social Democrats are good in opposition and in government, but there's always something extra when in government, of course. Well, we have had the 12 working groups, and the idea now is that I will try to pick up themes that came out of some of these working groups, try to reflect them very quickly, one at a time, and then see how members of the panel would like to answer them. And I have told the members of the panel to try to speak frankly and to be sharp and crisp to the issue, and in order to have a good interaction between us. And then we'll see how it goes. And I would like to pick one of the groups which was on global governance and the reshaping of international organizations for global challenges, with work group 3. And maybe Pascal can help us to start here, because there is a discussion about whether the world is multipolar or non-polar. Everybody agrees that it is not bipolar any longer. It's not as in the disease, but as in the structure that we had in the Cold War. I think it's also widely understood that unipolarity and the leadership of the West and America is over. What do we have? Do we have a multipolar world? Or do we actually have a world where nobody is picking up the vacuum that was left when the old leaders left the scene, if I may say? And I think this is a rather important question for us all. And in many areas, in economic governance, in trade, and in security policy, who is going to take the lead? Who is going to shape the norms and institutions of the 21st century? And what is the role of progressive governance? And who is better to start answering that than Pascal Lamy, who's trying to do this on a daily basis? Pascal, please.
Well, it's a huge question, and I I would distinguish sort of medium and long term and short term. We had the G8, move to the G20. Short term, what we have is a G0. And that's the most worrying feature for me of the present crisis. This crisis is a crisis which affects everybody. It's a global crisis, it's a multilateral crisis, but we have another crisis within the crisis, which is a crisis of multilateralism. How do you govern the crisis? And these two crises feed each other. I'm traveling this planet northwise, southwise, eastwise all the time. What I see is people who are lost. There's no pilot in that plane. Markets are at random. They're asking for clear political signals of what's the way out. Maybe not tomorrow, but maybe the day after tomorrow. This is not happening. And the reason why it's not happening is in a way understandable. Leaders, politicians, are accountable to their own constituencies. The crisis is beating them. The priority has become, what do I have to do domestically to survive? By the way, very few of them survive when there are elections, which understandably is a worry for them. I attended the G20 in Cannes, and that was physically tangible. So we have a huge problem short term. We need national leaders to accept to devote a little bit of what's left of their political energy to coalesce and do things together. If they don't do that, the crisis will be worse, longer than it is. Now, medium and long term, my view on this and my experience on this is, in a way, rather simple. Global governance is about leadership, legitimacy, efficiency. And it cannot work like a national government where leadership, legitimacy, and efficiency are in the same hand of something which is called the government. I mean, a government, an administration, a parliament, a judicial system. Government in the sort of American sense of the term. Now, the international system cannot have these three elements in the same place. And the reality is that those who are legitimate are not good at legitimacy, at efficiency or leadership. Those who are good at leadership are not good at legitimacy or efficiency, and those who go to efficiency are not good in the two other places. So we have the G20 for leadership, weak legitimacy, no efficiency. We have the UN, great legitimacy. If you poll people worldwide and say, what's the institution you love best? The answer is UN from far. Let's say leadership, not really that, and efficiency, probably not also. And then, but it has a huge legitimacy. And then you have the rest, which are international organizations, where leadership is not that great because it's member-driven, and you know, we know what a member-driven car does. But they're not that legitimate because they're only governments interacting, but they are very efficient. So in a way, we have to combine this. And the question for us in our political family is, how can we influence this triangle best? Not just one bit of the triangle, but the three sides of the triangle. And I think there's a lot that can be done, including with parties, political parties, and civil society, if we understand that it's the three bits, the three sides of this triangle that we have to try and influence.
Thank you, Pascal. I think a crucial argument for social democrats and progressives is that we need politics on a global level, more than just coordination between national policies. And of course, still an important player in creating that is the European Union, and Denmark will take over the chairmanship. And Nick, where are you going in that respect? There's a new government.
It is a new government in Denmark, and it's also a very crucial time in the European family right now. I certainly agree with Pascal that there is a lack of leadership on the global stage. And one of the institutions and one of the families that can provide leadership, if we want to, is of course the EU. And therefore, the message from this meeting, and I believe also from the Danish presidency, should be that even though we are in the midst of a giant crisis within Europe, we cannot afford only to look inwards. We need also to have the global perspective. That goes, for instance, for the G20 meetings, where it is essential that the EU plays a strong role. And also that the G20 is actually a setting where not only the big EU countries, but also the smaller EU countries can contribute because of the representation of the EU in that setting. What I would like to see from the EU during this crisis and also in the years to come is an EU that punches accordingly to its political weight. Right now, it's the opposite. We are punching below our weight. And we must not, as I mentioned, let internal problems stay so much in our focus that we cannot engage in a wider scope. And of course, this meeting and our political family must also make it very clear that human rights, democracy, but also growth and job creation must be the centerpiece of the EU policy position, also in the global context, and also that we provide leadership from the EU when it comes to the climate situation and the environment coming up to the negotiations in Durban and also, of course, in Rio +20. So this is a chance for Europe, even though we are in the middle of a huge internal crisis, to play a stronger role on the international scene. But it takes leaders that wants to do that. And it also takes an effort by the incoming presidency, and we'll do our utmost to deliver that so that Europe can speak with a strong voice for human rights, for job creation, for the climate in the next 6 months and after that. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikolai. It seems that the upcoming Danish presidency will pick up Pascal's advice to look beyond your own borders and remember the global arena. And I think the advice is crucially important because the EU has been inward-looking, the US is inward-looking, even China is preoccupied by solving its own internal problems, and their international politics seems to be highly guided by their immediate self-interest, as is true for many other countries. And if nobody looks beyond that, we're in trouble. Even Ireland is a committed multilateralist for ages, and also a devout European. How do you see this from your position, how we can connect Europeanism with the global governance approach?
I think the first difficulty is that politics and governance, I think, is playing catch-up. We're constantly saying we live in a global economy. Communications are global. Many of the challenges that face the world, like climate change, for example, is global. But we haven't developed a politics and a form of governance which has caught up with that. The vacuum, something fills the vacuum. And the problem at the moment in terms of economic governance is that the vacuum is being filled by the markets. Leaders in Europe wake up this morning and their immediate concern is not what the European Commission has had to say about them or the World Trade Organization or the IMF. They're worried about what Standard & Poor's has to say about them. And I think, you know, until we manage to develop systems whereby we are effective governance systems on economic issues, we're going to be constantly victims and constantly responding to the markets and to bodies which are unaccountable, like, for example, the ratings agencies. I think that we do have to question, in relation to economic governance, I think the role of the G20. I mean, why the G20? I mean, why are we not talking? I mean, if we are, and we're a family here of people who believe in equality and development and equality as between people in developing countries and developed countries, why are we not talking in a genuinely multilateral way about a much more democratic system of economic governance for the world? I think that that is number one. I think there are a number of positive signs. I think the United Nations, for example, I think was strengthened in 2011. I think the role, for example, that it played in relation to the Arab Spring and the decisiveness in relation to Libya, and I know that there are critics of that, but it showed a leadership on the part of the United Nations, which I think is a very positive sign and something that can be built upon. I think that the European Union has also, I think, progressed very significantly. The European Union now, particularly since the establishment of the Foreign Affairs and the External Action Service, is now playing a much more active role in world affairs. And I think in particular, for example, the role that the EU and Catherine Ashton has been playing in relation to the Middle East peace process, I think is showing a leadership role that the EU is playing, and similarly in relation to issues such as climate change and in the period leading up to Durban. I think we're also beginning to see the development of models in different parts of the world which appear to be modeled around the European Union. Groups of states coming together for economic cooperation in, for example, East Africa, South America, and again, I think we need to build on that. So I think there are some positive signs. The difficulty, of course, is that international institutions, as they are at the moment, it may be, Pascal, that people's first preference in terms of international organizations is the United Nations. But I think all of the international organizations need to be reformed, and we need to get a sense of connectedness between international organizations, including, incidentally, European Union institutions. One of the big problems, and we all know this from our political practice, how quickly and how easily government, even at a national level, can become remote from citizens and their wishes and their desires and so on. International organizations have an even bigger capacity to get remote from people, to become flabby, to become inefficient, and to become bureaucratic.
Just before we leave you for the moment, would you agree that one of the reasons that the EU has become rather unpopular is that national leaders often have used the EU as an argument for promoting unpopular policies?
Yes, I think that that is true. I think I think that the European Union hasn't been internalized, I think, in the politics of countries, and yet at the same time, I think we all do understand the necessity to respond to issues at a European level. I also think that we need to do a little review, I think, on the way in which the institutions are working at present. I think that the shift in the locus of power to the council, I think needs to be looked at. I think we're seeing a shift away from the community approach, which many of us would have supported. And I think what is happening within that context is the emergence of kind of an informal, big country power center, which I think is going to be hugely damaging to the European Union. The European Union is a union of 27 member states. It's not a union of 2. And I think that we need to get back much, much more to this sense that it is 27 and that the leadership within the European Union needs to be on a much more collective basis rather than being driven by the leaders of 2 countries alone.
Thank you very much, Eamon. Let me move towards the other side here, and Sharon, as Secretary General of the International Trade Union Congress. Working Group 12 was working particularly on the issue of decent work and its essential elements, employment and workers' rights. And I think in several working groups, and also what I've already heard here, there is a reference to actors beyond the traditional actors when it comes to financial regulation and economic policies. And how do you, as a globally oriented trade union organization, foresee a way by which that the workers' interests are actually present when global decisions are being made? Sure.
Well, thank you. Let me just pick up on 2 points that have been made over here, with Pascal starting the debate. Frankly, I think the European Union is now just captive of the markets. Anyone who tells me that you can have a global oligopoly, 3 ratings agencies, Moody's, Standard & Poor's and Fitch, and that politicians, as they do, exactly wake up every day and say what's happening with the markets, not what's happening to my people, not what are we going to do to kickstart the economy around jobs, then I think you have to say, where is the economic authority? And the marriage of the ratings agency and the bond markets is, in fact, so dangerous that it's now absolutely able to create a run on sovereign debt overnight. We're not talking about them ranking corporations anymore. We're talking about creating a run on sovereign debt. That renders politicians almost totally powerless. Now, this doesn't have to be. I was struck by the courage of the Commissioner last week or the week before, who said he was going to regulate the ratings agents. Remember, the G20 promised that in 2009. Hasn't happened. And then what happened? Everyone else jumped on him. And I watched them repeat what the Moody's CEO had said, that this would damage the credit markets. Well, good. The credit markets aren't working for working people. But let me even be more provocative. I think in that context, the European Union has lost its moral authority. I speak from an outsider. I come from Australia. I now head up the global union movement. But we used to look to Europe and its social dialogue model as the way in which democracy could work. Instead, what do we have now? A group of countries that, when the deputies in Toronto after Pittsburgh and London, G20, when they promised never again would the financial industry be in charge of the real economy and that jobs would be at the heart of the exit from the crisis, they failed on both counts, and now we have an even more bitter crisis of unemployment and a whole generation of young people looking like they'll be excluded with slow or stagnant growth over the next 10 years. And what does Europe do? It not only races to austerity, it makes its own people now the victims of a war on labour rights. Yet the economic sense says, Economics 101, jobs, income-led growth from jobs and social protection. Indeed, that's the way. Workers in work. Income will drive demand and drive us out of the crisis. But do we have a coordinated strategy even in Europe for jobs? No. Denmark, I must say, I was delighted to hear your new Prime Minister. Fantastic. Kick-starting the economy. What a dream. But sadly, Denmark can't do it on its own. So, we say jobs, jobs and jobs. And I see Paul here in the front. We've had this conversation, but we're all going to head, some of us are going to head to Durban next week. And how depressing will that be? The European Union doesn't even have an ambitious leadership plan, when again we used to look to them for moral authority. But it's in their interest, because our research, preliminary as it is, it's for Rio plus 20, but shows that in 12 countries, if you put 2% of GDP, doesn't have to be government expenditure, can be facilitated or a carbon price or whatever, 2% a year of GDP over 5 years, guess what? You can have 55 million jobs in just 12 countries. That's what we want. So jobs, jobs and jobs, social protection, these are the way to get us out of the crisis. In fact, we would say, if you think to shrink is to grow is an oxymoron, well, you're right. And in terms of a tax on labour rights, I have to say to the governments, not just in the EU, but in the US, in Latin America, and indeed in Mexico, where the G20 will be next year, and Asia, an attack on labour rights is not on. We're actually bringing people together in 2 weeks to say we're drawing a line in the sand, and any government, any politician that thinks that attacking workers' rights to bargain collectively, to join unions, to have a decent minimum wage is the right way to go, well, you're no longer going to be on our Christmas card list.
Thank you so much, Sharon. And let me just add that I think the statistics and history is with you, because actually those countries in Europe that are doing best through the financial crisis have systematically strong trade unions, strong and well-organized employers' organizations that work together with a strong state, and strong welfare states which are market-friendly in the sense that they do allow change, but they also protect the people in change. And by the way, also the countries with the lowest gender gap in employment and in wages. So our story actually holds if you look at why the Nordic countries systematically perform somewhat better than the other countries, and that's a strong argument. And it's also a strong argument that the liberal textbook in America actually is wrong on these issues. Let me move to the south and east, and also to the left of this on this table from my perspective. Before I do that, I'll just remind you that you will need, those of you who are not fluent in Turkish or French would want to have one of these and turn them on. Channel 1 is English, Channel 2 is French, and so on. And they are out there if you haven't picked them up. I will start with Tunisia, Khalil. We were all very inspired with what happened in Tunisia over Christmas last year and this spring. There's no doubt about it. The Arab Spring started in Tunisia and also continued in a much more peaceful way, relatively speaking, in Tunisia compared to, obviously, your immediate neighbor, but also compared to Egypt, as we all see. But some are still asking the question, and maybe with the exception of Tunisia, is the Arab Spring becoming an Arab autumn and an Arab winter? Please.
I think that what is going on in Tunisia is going to be used as an example for other countries. It was said that today in the Arab world there is a kind of understanding between Muslims and socialists, and it's not a coalition, but it is an understanding, an agreement to manage the transition. And this could be the best solution to reach a democracy, and with a dilution of all the religious and Muslims influences. To me, the current difficulties of Egypt are going to be overcome. I'm not an expert in the field, but I think that Egyptians, like other European or other Arab countries, will be able to organize democratic and transparent elections with of course, in power, parties that might have a religious connotation in a first stage, but I'm sure that socialists and social democrats are going to take on board, are going to become leaders after this transitional stage. We, in Tunisia, we succeeded because of the social dimension and the economic dimension. Today, we have 10,750,000 unemployed people. And this is, of course, a major problem. So I know that times are difficult, but tourism, for instance, tourism, which is essential for a country like Tunisia, tourism should be strongly supported by our European friends. If we do not want Tunisia to be left on its own and to have reactions like the ones we have in Iraq. So we strongly expect your support so that in the next 2 years we would be able to enjoy a comfortable situation. And we want the social democrats to succeed. Muslim parties have a certain percentage of voters. They have between 20 and 25%, but they have 40% of seats, which means that, well, they do not have the absolute majority. They are surrounded by democratic forces. The fact that we have this movement, this alliance, is only possible if we are able to properly manage the economic crisis and if we're able to tackle the issue of unemployment. I really hope that we are going to develop this good neighborhood policy between Europe and the Arab countries. I hope it's going to be based on shared wealth and prosperity. But this shared wealth and prosperity has to be supported by those who are wealthy enough so that people in trouble might find their way in this new world.
Thank you, Khalil. And it's so good to have you with us in this club with your current capacity and given the developments that we have seen in Tunisia over this last year, which inspires all of us. And I think you raised many of the questions that are paramount to all the countries that are now in transition. You know, how to manage the political future, also how to get economic growth. And obviously, your problem as well is the crisis in Europe, because I agree we should all go as tourists to Tunisia, but there are less tourists coming because people have less money, and there are less remittances coming because Tunisians in Europe have less access to work. And I would like you to say a little bit of how the international financial crisis and economic crisis affects you and your democratic development.
Le tourisme est très important en Tunisie.
Tourism is, of course, very important in Tunisia because it leads to 1 million jobs, which is quite a lot. We have so-called mass tourism, so not so expensive compared to Morocco, which has a more luxury or elite-based tourism. And yes, last year we had a decrease of more or less 50%, but we are still less expensive than many other countries in Europe. So there are, of course, efforts to drive tourists towards Greece, and I hope this is not going to be detrimental to Tunisia. The tourism ministry is going to be led by our party under the next government, which is, of course, a very good thing.
Even another reason to go to Tunisia on vacation. The working groups 1 and 2 have both been dealing with the issues that you already commented on. I would then like to move to Kemal, the leader of CHP. And let me introduce by saying that one of the most interesting political developments that I have seen, at least over the last decade, is the re-emergence of the emergence of a new Turkey, which is more at peace with its history and more forward-looking in its political and economic agenda. And a country with a significant economic growth, far higher than the European standard, and with a new sense of role in the world over the last years. It's quite interesting that as long as Turkey, through its old Kemalist policies, tried to move to the West through authoritarian means, it actually became, in my view, more European when it sort of reconciled with its past and with its Islamic roots. I would very much like to hear two things from you. First, of course, your answer to the frequent argument that Turkey is the model that the Arab Revolution should take in order to avoid Iran, the Iranian model. And the second question is, how do we look from Ankara?
Thank you very much. This is an important question, both for our region and for Turkey. Mr. Lamy, in his speech, talked about G8 and G20, and then talked about multilateral crises. The crisis has a European dimension and also a dimension that touches the developing countries. In Tunisia, what triggered the Arab Spring was a university graduate student who put himself into fire. From this point of view, we have to see it a little bit differently. The crisis which is in the region of Arab Spring and in Europe are two different things. There is a financial crisis in Arab countries, but beyond that, in the geography of Arab Spring, human rights, gender equality, freedom of media are also nearly vanished. So the main problem ahead of us is what started as an Arab Spring and is still going on. Did it really give the consequence we expected? Were we able to take initiatives to improve all the points I mentioned before? We have to question ourselves. I do not think there was a positive development in this field. Of course, in Libya, there was a development too. One of the speakers said the EU had an important role of leadership in Libya, but no leader should endorse the lynching, the killing of another leader. You can judge him. You can put him in front of a judge, but if you kill and endorse the killers of a leader, I don't think this can be supported. Another important point, our Tunisian friend said something very beautiful. If we don't want to turn into Iran, he said, which means if we want to be a secular, democratical, modern, pro-freedom country, do not leave us alone. And all the speakers should really know very well that Muslim region has its own conditions and its own difficulties. We have to see how do they become political issues. Without really understanding this, we cannot produce solutions to the problems of the area. Being European has always been a target for us in order to level with the modern world. It's a part of a cultural target. Without the European Union, we maintained our independency on our own, and we took our civil law from Switzerland. Nobody forced this on us. Nobody said it's because it's in harmony with the EU laws, but in the name of a modern civilization, gender equality, democracy, freedom, how should a constitution be? What is freedom of media? That's what we're looking after, and that's what we desire. Recently, Turkey had really brilliant developments, indeed. But did we really evaluate what did it cost us? We're number one in the budget deficit in the world, and we never question ourselves about that. We never talk about the bigger number of prisoners, journalist prisoners, in more than in China, in Turkey. So can we really set a model for Arab countries? When they ask me this question, this is my answer. The European people, the Arab people, the Middle Eastern people desire to live in a democratic country like in Turkey. They admire Turkish people, Turkish administration, but our governors envy the Arab governors. So let's be more repressive, let's muzzle the media. We cannot overlook this reality. For example, if you want to set a model, if you want to be a role model, we should not collect an unpublished book. We should show a Turkey where we can really live freely, where we can actually freely express ourselves. We're a Muslim country, yes, demographically, but we're also a secular, social, democratic country. That's what we are. We want to be. We want to separate government issues from religious issues. But on the other hand, the developments are in the other direction. So we have to follow them very closely, and they should be known. We really would like to be a role model as a country with a high democracy, with a high standard of freedoms, where media can express itself freely. Of course, we'd like to be a role model. And we would like to move forward in this direction. But with regards to conditions, especially political conditions, Turkey is very far from being a role model. No Middle Eastern country would say, I would like to model a Turkey with less freedom, with less expression of media. We want a more democratic, more pro-freedom Turkey, where everyone can express themselves freely. The Middle Eastern people, the Arab people, have a more repressive government. In the 21st century, you cannot really repress expression of freedom. And as the EU, as an applicant country to the EU, we have to question ourselves, do we really, about the Arab Spring, does the EU and the countries composing the EU, do they have any responsibility in the Arab Spring? Especially in Athens, at the International PES Convention, there were Arab youngs who joined the Arab Spring. One of them took the floor and he said, we actually did march. We wanted the young people to be a part of the government, but unfortunately, there are people who are at the age of 80 who are governing us. So this is what we should think about.
Thank you very much, Kemal. I think this was very useful. I just refer the comment from the first the Arab Spring Group, number 1, which says that there has been a conceptual shift from Iran to Turkey. Social democrats need to form consensus with moderate Islam, so as not to be dominated by dictators again, or that the countries should not be dominated by dictators again. I think it's important that we get the two sides of this, and of course also that we are reminded that Turkey is also still in political development itself. And I think you made that clear. Thank you. Do you want to add something?
Yes, indeed. Dear President, we should avoid falling into the mistake of moderate Islam. There's no such thing. It does exist in some literature, and it is used. But if we want to form a secular state, we should, of course, respect everyone's beliefs. We should, of course, respect everyone's ethnicity. But if we use religion moderately in politics, I don't think this is a right approach.
Text from the working group. In my country, we have a Christian People's Party, and a few decades ago, they were more or less like the what you know as the AKP, but just that they were Christians rather than Muslims. So this happens around the globe. We've been in one full round. We have some more minutes. I would like to mention that there was a working group on water as tomorrow's most strategic resource. There was a working group on the food crisis, tackling speculation, and there was a working group of climate. We haven't sort of addressed that, so you may want to pick up some of that in your further comments. It was Nikolai first.
Yes, I would like to make a few comments to our friends from Tunisia and also from Turkey. First of all, I believe that the EU and Europe owes it to the young people of Tunisia and the Arab Spring who gave their lives to promote freedom and democracy, that we do not leave them behind now. And that means that the EU must play a very important and active role in supporting the democratic forces of the Arab Spring. That means that we have a moral obligation, that means that we have a democratic obligation, and of course we also have a self-interest in having a friendship and also a working relationship based on these values. That is also why one of the tasks of the new Danish EU presidency will be, and I'm looking very much so forward to this, to open up trade negotiations with Tunisia during the Danish presidency, to say this is not just nice rhetoric, this is also something we do in the real world. And concerning Turkey, we want during the Danish presidency to bring forward the dialogue and the negotiations with Turkey. We know we have a long road ahead of us, and we also would like to emphasize from the Danish presidency that it is extremely important, as Kemal mentioned, that Turkey lives up to the standards when it comes to freedom of press and democracy. We want, when Turkey is ready and when Turkey is saying yes to membership, to have Turkey as a part of the EU. But we certainly also want that Turkey, before doing that, has acknowledged that reform must be made when it comes to, for instance, freedom of the press. So you have the full support of the Danish presidency, both of you, and we are looking forward to work with you in the next months ahead of us. Thank you.
Nikolai, that applause was for what you said, but I think also for the pleasure that we all feel by having you back after 10 years out in the dark, after Paul left or was not allowed to continue as Prime Minister. It's so good to have a progressive government in Denmark, and that it is now taking over EU presidency. That's going to be tough, but very, very important. Comment from Khalil?
I wanted to thank you. The European Union has created a task force for Tunisia that will be in charge of renegotiating the partnership agreement and of improving the conditions, the terms of that partnership. A big chapter within this agreement is devoted to agriculture. The opening up of the markets regarding agriculture could lead to problems, as the common agricultural policy is leading to problems in Europe. So we have to pay attention, and we count upon the Danish presidency as well as upon the presidency of this task force chaired by Spanish Social Democrats. So we hope that such negotiations are going to be fruitful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eamon.
Yes, I just wanted to follow on from Nikolai. One of the, I suppose, one of the things that we worry about at the PES is the extent to which there are now very few Labour or Social Democratic parties either in government or leading government within the European Union. We're now a very small group. But happily in this case, Denmark will be entering into the presidency of the European Union at the beginning of next year. And as it happens, Ireland will have the presidency at the beginning of 2013, and Cyprus is in between. And therefore we will have a period, I think, of continuity, certainly at the Foreign Affairs Council and at the General Affairs Council, where the leadership will be provided by Social Democratic ministers. And I think on issues relating to the support that we provide to the countries of North Africa, the way in which we approach the whole issue of enlargement, I think that we will see a consistency of approach and an openness as far as our policy positions are concerned. And finally, as it happens next year, I know it's not an organisation that gets a lot of discussion these days, but the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which stretches from Vancouver to Vladivostok, Ireland will hold the chair of that next year, and that organisation has an important role in supporting the building of democracy and the building of capacity in civil society, and we'll be very happy to support you and the work that you are doing in that respect.
Well, I mean, that's a very good reminder that the Social Democrats actually are in power more than we sometimes think. And Pascal, of course, is in the WTO.
Deux remarques sur ce qui a été.
Two comments. A few words about this global crisis, which is at the same time a financial, economic, social crisis, but also a crisis of governance. This is very serious. And the fact that there is no one in the driving seat is going to worsen the crisis. The crisis is getting more and more worse. And I'm not talking as a European, but just having this global view, this global vision. This lack of governance, this crisis of governance, the fact that we are not able to make agreements is not related to the crisis. We already had this lack of governance before. Mid-90s, we've had the Kyoto Protocol, the Uruguay round, but after that, nothing very important happened because of the emergence of some developing countries. We have to revisit the rules of the game at international level. It takes a lot of time. There is a lot of bureaucracy involved. The crisis increased the difference between developed countries and emerging countries and makes things even more complicated. This is true for international trade agreements or negotiations. It's also true at the level of climate change. Let's compare our hopes 5 or 10 years ago and compare this with our expectations for the Durban conference. It's also true at macroeconomic level. It's true at all levels. This is serious and it's a major problem. The European crisis, for very European reasons, is absorbing a lot of energy. And obviously, the voice of Europe in such fields is very weak today. A second comment. If you try and see how we could come out of the crisis, of course, progressive forces have answers to provide, theoretical answers and practical answers, which means that all together we have to leave this comfort area, this area that we know all very well here around the table. We won't be able to improve the governance if we do not associate to that work progressive forces with which we are not working. The party of the Indian, or the Indian party, the Brazilian party, and so on. We do not work enough with such partners. I'm a very independent person, so I would like to tell you that the IS is not really reflecting this effort, the effort that we need. We won't be able to solve that issue next week or next month, but if we do not tackle that issue everything we hear, those nice words about it's the markets that govern the planet and we have to go against that, okay. But if we do not have in front of that big and global coalitions that can exert some influence, our words are never going to be translated into practice. So this is really an appeal to action. I'd like to make this a call for action. European socialists should try and put together such big and wide coalitions.
Thank you very much, Pascal, for that very important reminder. We're almost at the end now. I will give Sharon a final word, and I did remind her that Working Group 9 also mentioned trade for small producers and workers. If you could say a few words at the end here.
I have one request and one suggestion. The first request is when Denmark leads the discussions with Tunisia, or indeed any of our North African colleagues, there's something you can do immediately. There are thousands of European companies. We've added them up. I can tell you how many from each of the countries in Tunisia. If they each were supported by the EU to take an apprentice or two or an intern or two tomorrow with ODA for wage incentives, you do something about kick-starting some hope for those young, educated Tunisians who started the revolution and for whom our unions are standing up with progressives around policy. So I would ask you to make trade discussions inclusive and on a new model. Let's not see Denmark fall into the trap of a trade model that works for the big multinationals and not for the small producers and for the workers. If you actually have a will to get the formal economy going, to turn around the informal economy that's growing in every country, then you can do it with progressive trade policy. But for goodness sake, talk to some social partners about this, and I know you will. The suggestion is exactly where Pascal left off. Frankly, you know, the IS, reinvent it. Do something. We have no global progressive voice, none. The union movement has a global voice and we want a partner and we don't have one. And so can I make a very interesting suggestion? Not a conference of 2,000, but if you want to really show up leaders that you don't support and we don't support, and come up with a global coordination plan for employment, for secure jobs, secure income, leading the way that Norway talked about the economies with regulated markets and social protection that work, then bring together your 50 best thinkers across the progressive forces globally and indeed your social partners, and let's get a plan that we can all support.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sharon, and thanks to all of you. We have to bring this to a close. We delivered on 1 hour. We were a quarter late, now we're a quarter over, but we'll still leave it there. But I want to end by saying we did not specifically address water, food, or climate, but we still did, because what Pascal and others were referring to about global goods and global good governance is, of course, equally important for those sectors as for the financial regulations and so on. And the inputs from the working groups will be used in further work in the PES on programs and so on. And let me also say that what the final point that was so eloquently made by Sharon and Pascal about our global institution was exactly the way we concluded in my working group as well on global institutions, where thanks to Johan Hassel from UC, the argument was made that this group may not be able to change the UN, the G20, the World Bank, the IMF, a little bit different from the World Trade Organization, but all these institutions overnight. But what we can do is to make sure that our alliance works and that we have a strong global set of partners, the Indians, the Brazilians, the Turks, the Indonesians, the Africans. There's a lot of progressive governance out there, more than we think, because many of the emerging countries are currently run by progressive democratic governments. Look at Brazil. More democracy and more growth and more distribution came together. Look at Indonesia, same thing. So our model actually has appeal outside of Europe. So where are they in our deliberations? I think that is a very good way to conclude. Let's at least get our own story right. Let's make some common ground with all the progressive forces out there, and let's take what we heard today with us in that pursuit. Thank you for your presence here, and thank you for the attention.